ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 2 of the series What If Quirkless Deku Gets the Ability to Copy All the Quirks? So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku was leaning on a mound of trash playing with his new quirks. Note he had kept the quirks, so it was most likely permanent. So he really did have all for one. Izuku was testing out his quirks because they were so interesting. His metal bones were basic, but looking at the color of them, they seemed to be some kind of titanium alloy. Probably something close to it, as there is no way he'd be able to move around if his bones were titanium. But his electric quirk was a bit more interesting. He could emit a small amount around his body. It wasn't strong, but it did hurt when Izuku was shocked, but it was probably because of his metal bones. But that wasn't the entirety of his quirk's ability. He could turn himself into a lightning bolt. Izuku wondered why the guy he had taken the quirk from hadn't turned into a lightning bolt. He was using his quirk anyway, why not use more of it? The charge would be the same. It was not until Izuku became a lightning bolt that he realized why. He could hardly control it. He could pick a direction to the go, but the point of where he'll land. No clue. Izuku can't seem to transform into a bolt when touching a wall though, probably a limitation from the ions around him. Despite the excitement of analyzing his new quirks and quirk, Izuku was terrified. No more than terrified. He had all for one, which belongs to the sworn enemy of the people with one for all. Could he go back home? Would his family hurt him even more knowing what he was capable of? He didn't doubt. In fact, it was highly likely. How far would they go? Would they finish him? Izuku didn't know he did know that Izumi at least wanted him dead. Would that be good enough to just get rid of him? Izuku thought of his family. All of the times they went on vacation and just forgot him. The snarls and hate-filled looks Izumi and her friends gave him. The tortured-fueled days and overall unpleasant life. If he was treated this way by hero parents, top 10 at that, how were other kids treated? Izuku looked down at his hand. He now had power. The power to give and take quirks. Izuku closed his fist and looked up with new determination. He then got up and started scavenge the junkyard. After a bit of searching, he found some old scissors. They obviously weren't in the best of shape and the handles of them were falling apart or had fallen apart. But Izuku didn't care. He ran back inside the caravan. He went to the small mirror inside the caravan and looked at his reflection. He wasn't a Yagi. He never had been as soon as he turned 4. No one wanted a useless Deku like him around. But he wouldn't be the only kid who was tormented because of this. Being ostracized because of something he had no control over. With this new quirk, he could stop this. He could take away the quirks of the privileged who constantly put others down and help those who were bullied and abused like him. He'll be a hero to those who don't meet society's standards of a worthy person. But he can't do that, at least not as Izuku Yagi. Izuku would change who he is, cut all ties with who he once was, and become what a hero should be. Izuku started cutting his hair. He didn't stop until his hair was more manageable. There was still a lot, but it was longer everywhere and looked somewhat natural. More curly than tangled. But that didn't matter to Izuku. He looked at himself in the mirror, his eyes alight with determination. He's going to be the best hero, like he had promised himself. It was early in the morning, the sun hadn't even risen yet. But it was nothing but quiet. You did what to Izuku? Mitsuki yelled. Masaru and Rei held her back as she tried storming her way to Inko. Recovery Girl and Torino were furious at Toshinori and both hitting him. They wanted to yell at him more for being a hypocrite, but couldn't say as there are others in the room. Nizu had gotten the kids all to sit down on the couch with Enji aka Endeavor right next to him. Izumi, Katsuki, Katsumi, Shoto and Zayato were all looking down. 3 of them were crying and all of them were looking shameful. Enji was staring down the 5 kids. A look that held fury and disappointment. Nizu had a smile on his face as he sipped his tea, seemingly happy at the teen's misery. He chuckled. Nizu held one of Izuku's future hero analyses books. He was reading through it with an impressed look. He had requested to see any of Izuku's belongings and Naomasa had only returned with medical supplies, bleach, and a stack of future analyses book. This had enraged the already angry adults of how little Izuku had. Looking at these books, he seemed to really look up to you five, Nizu said with a sadistic smile. Katsuki growled and looked at the chimera. Yeah, we screwed up, rat. So can you please stop rubbing it in our faces? Katsuki said angrily. Oh, shut up, brat. You should be blacklisted from hero schools. Mitsuki yelled angrily. She had tears streaming down her face as she cried into husband's shoulder. That may be the right decision. However, you also have to consider the environment. These five, although made the decision to hurt Izuku, they were never stopped or punished. They had done it in front of teachers and school staff, and they all looked the other way. If they had done their jobs, Izuku wouldn't have suffered quirk discrimination, which means Aldera will suffer consequences. But you five aren't off the hook, Nizu stated, glaring threateningly at the five teens as he said the last sentence. They all gulped and looked at Nizu dreadfully. Nizu chuckled at their faces. You will be blacklisted from every hero school other than mine, UA. So if you get expelled, that's it. I have no doubts that you kids will pass the entrance exam, but one mishaps of bullying another kid, and it will be an immediate expulsion. The first-year teacher also likes expelling students. In fact, he expelled his entire first-year class on the first day. Nizu smiled menacingly. This made all five gulp. So you better do your best. To help you, all five of you will attend therapy, and if you end up graduating, the first 3 years of your career, you'll experience half pay, Nizu said. Do I make myself clear? Nizu asked in a menacing voice, one that does not match his small and cute appearance. The entire room froze at it, and all looked scared at Nizu. The five kids all looked pale and nodded their heads. Nizu laughed and turned away from them. Mitsuki shook herself out of her fright and stood up. What about these two? They have no excuse. Mitsuki shouted, angrily pointing at Toshinori and Inko. Nizu sighed and stopped smiling, looking at the two with no emotion on his face. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do but subtract their pay grade, Nizu said. This infuriated Mitsuki. What? Is it because she's a top 10 hero? Mitsuki shouted angrily. Katsuki, Shoto, Katsumi, and Zayato all gasped in shock. They knew Rei was Ice Queen and Inji was Endeavor, but they didn't know that Inko was Green Tornado. Nizu sighed and shook his head. No, she's not the problem in this situation, Nizu responded. Mitsuki's eyes widened. She looked over and looked at Toshinori. He laughed nervously and looked down. He then yelped as a syringe cane whacked him on the head. Yeah, this idiot is the #1 hero, Gran Torino said, glaring at him. Again, the same 4 teens gasped. He was All Might. The #1 hero neglected their own son. They were all stunned. Mitsuki had wide eyes as she stared at Toshinori. As soon as she processed the information of him being All Might, she quickly saw all red. Her face contorted into rage. #1 hero my ARSE. She shouted as she ran up Toshinori. The man froze. Rei was only barely able to hold her back. Masaru quickly came up to help, but they were struggling to keep her back. While that was happening, Naomasa came back into the room. He saw the ensuing chaos and blinked. He quickly recomposed himself and walked over to Nizu. He bent down to his level. Nizu, sir, but I need to speak with you. Toshinori and Gran Torino privately, he said. Nizu turned to him, curious, and nodded his head. But first, he turned to Enji. Endeavor, here, the Chimera spoke, holding up Izuku's analyses book. The fire hero turned to him and raised his eyebrow. Why? He asked. He grabbed the book and looked at the open page. There was an image of him on it. Nizu smirked and put his paws behind his back. That's Izuku's hero analyses booklet. I believe the information you'll find in it quite impressive, he said. The 5 teens all widened their eyes at his statement. Naomasa, deciding it would be better for his sanity to not ask about what Nizu was talking about, decided to ignore it and focus on the issue he had just been called for. Toshinori, Torino, I need you both to come with me. This is a private matter, Naomasa said seriously. The two of them looked at him confused and slightly shocked. They both nodded and walked over to them. Naomasa led them out of the room and shut the door. He sighed before turning to the 3. Naomasa, while we're here, will I be charged if I taught Toshinori here a lesson? He asked while glaring at the man. Toshinori gulped and looked pleadingly at Naomasa. Naomasa sighed and shook his head. We'll talk about that later, but right now, Naomasa said, getting the 3's attention. I just got called by my chief. About an hour ago, they had arrested 2 thugs. They had tried to rob a scrawny kid who was crying in an alleyway. According to one of the thugs, they have a mutant quirk that makes their bones metal. But during the fight, the kid placed his hand on the man's face and then felt extreme pain. When he could get up again, he realized he no longer had his quirk, Naomasa said. Toshinori and Torino both looked horrified and Nizu had an unreadable expression. A pit had formed in Toshinori's stomach. All for One wasn't dead, but he had to have been. He crushed his head. But Naomasa isn't a liar, and he knows that. Which means that a kid with All for One is out on the streets, stealing quirks. Why had he openly showed himself now? Wouldn't it have been smarter if they had simply kidnapped men with suitable quirks, as they were obviously coincidental targets? A thought then popped into Toshinori's head, and it made his stomach drop. What if they were after Izuku? Naomasa sighed and continued talking. The other man has also lost his quirk, and neither have received their quirks back yet. It appears All for One has either found his successor or had a kid, which means that he was never killed, Naomasa said. Oh no, with Izuku on the streets. All for One's successor is going to be after to him, Gran Torino said. We will need to retrieve Izuku back as soon as possible so he can start training with One for All. The information we have on that kid was that they were small, scrawny dark hair in an afro style, Naomasa said. Not even a gender? Nizu inquired. Naomasa shook his head. No, they genuinely couldn't determine if the kid was male or female. Just that they might not even have been a teenager, Naomasa said. The 3 were shocked by this. The kid might not have even been a teenager? If it was All for One's successor, he probably took a kid while they were small and corrupted him. It makes all 3 feel sick that someone would stoop so low. Although the kid going after Izuku is an almost certainty, I think the biggest problem if they succeed is if they can convert him to their cause, Nizu said. Toshinori whipped his head around to look at Nizu. You don't think he'll become a villain, do you? Toshinori asked shakily. Well, Izuku doesn't know that you're All Might, but All for One does. He could use that information to convince Izuku that our hero society is corrupted. Also, the ability to give him a quirk is quite the persuasion over someone quirkless. But it would be horrible if Izuku became a villain, Nizu said. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. Why? Toshinori asked. Gran Torino scowled and kicked Toshinori in the knee. Toshinori yelped and buckled down to his knee. You hypocritical brat. You should know that quirkless doesn't mean useless. Nana should have never given you that quirk. Gran Torino yelled. Toshinori looked at him with fear before looking down. He agreed. He'd been terrible and didn't deserve it. Nizu coughed, gaining the 2's attention. Like I was saying, the reason it would be bad for Izuku to become a villain is because of his analyses. I read through his entire future hero analyses, and his skills are impressive. Able to match other analyses quirks I've come across, and he is only 13. With a little guidance, he could come up with plans to easily defeat heroes and perform serious heist with the knowledge of allies' quirks, Nizu said. The group were all shocked at what Nizu had just said. The Chimera rarely compliments others on their academics because it is so hard to impress him. But with his serious expression, they knew he wasn't joking. Naomasa collected himself. Well, it looks like finding Izuku is our #1 priority, Naomasa said. Izuku was still in the junkyard. His hair was all messy and he was in need of a shower, but Izuku can go without for a while. He's next to a beach anyway. If he wanted to bathe, he can go buy some washing supplies. Being in a junkyard isn't as dirty or disgusting as one might think. Well, maybe they are, but at least this one isn't mostly. This place is mostly for old furniture or machinery that stopped working and the people just couldn't be bothered to put it in the actual dumpster. It is disgusting. Izuku would obviously prefer people didn't do that, but right now it's working in his favor. Izuku is currently practicing with his bolt quirk. It would be extremely useful for escaping and running away. Especially his tormentors, as Izuku could normally run away from everyone else, but his old friends and sister is impossible. Katsumi, Shoto, and Zayato all have quirks that can attack Izuku at a range even if he could run away. Izumi could just lift him in the air, and Katsuki can blast himself forward way faster than Izuku could ever run. Izuku has gotten better at it for the past few hours he's been practicing. He has actually found out some cool things about his quirk. He isn't a bolt of lightning, he is a bolt of electricity. So he can travel through wires or conductive objects. However, the downside is that he is naturally attracted to those conductive objects, and will go towards them even if he doesn't want to. His metal bone quirk doesn't really have much information on it. His bones are literally iron now, nothing more or less. It's actually a lot more annoying as he feels sluggish as Izuku of struggling to move himself around. However, the quirk has a built-in strength enhancement, so it isn't impossible for him to move around. It also helps him with natural muscle building as Izuku has to put more effort in to move around. So Izuku guesses it's a win-win. His bolt quirk will help move around, so it isn't that bad. Izuku smiled as he writ in his analyses book on quirks. He finally has one of his own. While he doesn't really know much about his quirk, other it being named All for One, allowing him to give and take quirks. It also belongs to his father's arch-nemesis, but that isn't really important. Unless he finds out, then Izuku is in trouble. He has so many questions about All for One. Like when he takes quirks from others, it seems like he hurts them. But is it every time Izuku does it? Or does it depend if the other person gives consent? What happens when Izuku gives someone a second quirk? Will they die, become sick, their lifespan shorter, or nothing will happen? Does it depend if the quirks are similar or completely different? Can he combine quirks together? How many quirks can he have, and if there is a limit, could Izuku increase it? Izuku doesn't know any of these questions, but desperately wants to find out. Izuku was writing all his thoughts down when something interrupted his thoughts. Izuku looked down and covered his rumbling stomach. Izuku hasn't eaten in a while, and he knows that. He commonly goes without much food for a long while, rarely actually having large meals, with those meals being leftovers from his sister being picky. But even Izuku has limits on how long he can go without proper food. Izuku sighed and rummaged around in his pocket. He pulled out the money he had, which he so happened to find in between couches. Izuku couldn't actually believe he found more than a few cents. He had $12 ready to be spent. Izuku would rather spend them on notebooks to document quirks or interesting things. But he can't ignore the fact he has to eat. Izuku got up from the junkyard. He had found a basket full of clothes. Some were ripped and generally unwearable, but he had found a nice gray hoodie that felt really nice. Strings of fabrics were everywhere, but Izuku didn't really care. The uniform he was wearing before was in a lot worse condition. School. What was he going to do about that? Would it really matter if he went to school? That place has been the biggest hellhole of his life. Izumi, Katsuki, Shoto, Katsumi, and Zayato were all born with amazing quirks, while they all deliberately try and make his life miserable because he wasn't born with one. The teachers don't care, and it's not like he has any friends that'll miss him. Izuku shrugged. He could always go to the library. Izuku walked through the streets with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He was getting several looks from passerbys. It was probably looks like he is homeless. Good observations by them. He was in fact homeless. He may as well have been for the past 9 years. Several people were pulling out their phones and suddenly taking phone calls. Izuku just ignored them as he went into a subway. People were still looking at him and then making phone calls. Izuku didn't really look into it. He was just hungry. He ordered a sandwich as cheap as possible before collecting it and leaving. Izuku dug in, taking small bites as he couldn't handle a lot of food at once. It will probably take him a while. Izuku mindlessly walked through the streets as he made his way back to the junkyard. Should he be searching for new quirks to get? A quirk that changes his appearance would help just to make sure none of his tormentors recognize him on the street. He doesn't want to deal with that without an easy way to get medical supplies as he no longer has a proper home. Maybe he can get a job? Unlikely someone will be willing to hire a quirkless person. It wouldn't be a good idea to state his actual quirk, so maybe a new name, and just say his quirk is bolt? It would probably be the best idea. Izuku wasn't caring about what was around him and completely zoned it all out. He wasn't brought back into the world until a hand grabbed his shoulder. Izuku flinched at the sudden touch. Luckily, it wasn't the shoulder with Katsuki's burned handprint. Izuku turned around to see who it was and breathed a shaky relief when he saw it was a hero. It was Amplifier. "Hey kid, are you okay?" she asked. Izuku's eyes widened but quickly shook off his shock. Of course a pro hero would be able to notice he didn't look like every other kid. He has bruises and worn-out clothes, but he can act fine. He's been able to trick Aunt Mitsuki for years, as she was still the only person who kind of remembered his existence and talked to him like he wasn't a piece of trash or fragile. Izuku smiled brightly at the hero. "Yes, Amplifier, I'm all good. I was just hungry and got some food," Izuku said earnestly. Which he really was. He was hungry and got some food. He was also good, Great, in fact. This is probably the best he has been in years. Amplifier didn't look convinced. All right, kiddo. Does your name happen to be Izuku Yagi? She asked. Izuku froze. How did she know about his name? His parents definitely wouldn't have filed a missing persons report, so that wasn't an option. He had only been mildly paying attention, but had noticed a lot of people staring at him throughout the day. He had taken 2 quirks from people yesterday, and there is no way the police wouldn't have noticed that. They probably have taken statements from those 2 thugs, and now know it's him who did it. Izuku was screwed. No, Izuku stuttered, becoming incredibly scared. Amplifier sighed and smiled softly. She reached out and grabbed Izuku's wrist with a soft, yet firm grip. Sorry, that wasn't convincing at all. Come on, Yagi, I'll get you home safe. No one will hurt you, she said and started slowly pulling Izuku along with her. Izuku was terrified. She was taking him home, to the Yagi's house, so he'll be safe. But that is the least safe place he could be. They know he is all for one. They would live him, torture him, make the last moments of his life more painful than the last 9 years combined. He couldn't go there. He had to run. Izuku couldn't even fight back against them. He remembers that his faith, no All Might, had stated that his quirk couldn't be taken. Even if he had taken all of his tormentor's quirks, Izuku still stood 0 chance against All Might. Izuku took in a sharp breath and reeled his arm back and punched Amplifier in the face. Amplifier yelled and let Izuku go. Izuku yelled out an apology before sprinting away. He was on the street, and there were several people with mobile phones out. He couldn't use his bolt quirk without accidentally going to one of them, so he needed to get high up. The rooftops. Hey Yagi, stop. I'm trying to help you. Amplifier yelled out. Izuku ignored her and kept running. You aren't though, Izuku thought as he ran. He got into an alley and used the trash to get to the roof. Izuku reached the top in no time before activating his quirk. Izuku felt a rush of energy around him. He dashed forward before his mind went blank. He didn't know what was happening, but that was normal as he was currently electricity. He just felt fear. Fear that he was now being hunted down. His family knew he had all for one, and they wanted to live him. The next thing Izuku knew was that he had slammed right into a wall. He yelled as he felt his iron bones rattle from the impact. Perhaps even his nose had been broken. Izuku slid down the wall and hit the ground with his stomach. Izuku groaned as he shakily pushed himself up and raised a hand to his nose. It felt wet. Izuku looked at his hands and saw a lot of vital fluid. Hey, look who came to the party. A male voice yelled. Izuku's eyes widened as he looked over and saw a man with white hair walking up to him. Izuku didn't know what he was doing, but he was too injured to ask. The man didn't until he saw their sadistic smile, where Izuku started to panic. Tsukachi sat in his office. Tashinori and Inko sat at the other end of his desk. They were both looking down and tense, their shoulders on high alert and their legs pushed together. Inko had her hand on Tashinori's leg and Tashinori had his hand on top of hers. They were anxious because Tsukachi had called them down with regard to Izuku. He had said they needed to be there as they required an extra set of hands because of the all-for-one successor out on the streets. But he received an unexpected call from another police department. All right, thank you for the information, and you couldn't have called at a more perfect time. Have a good evening, Tsukachi said before hanging up the phone. He then turned to the 2 Yagis with a very serious expression. Why was that phone call perfect timing, Naomasa? Inko asked. Naomasa gave her a quick glare at her, calling him his first name, but mostly ignored it. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. That call was from another police department. They had gotten a lot of calls and sent a few heroes out to investigate it, Naomasa said. Both Yagis raised an eyebrow, curious at where this was going. Naomasa sighed at their stupidity. They had caught sight of Izuku, he said. Both parents went wide-eyed and jumped up from their seats. Tashinori leaning over to Naomasa with desperate eyes. Did they get him? Is my boy okay? He asked desperately. Naomasa shook his heads. The pro-hero Amplifier tried taking him to the station, but Izuku had punched her in the face and fled. He got onto the rooftops, and no one was able to track him, Naomasa said. Tashinori and Inko both looked down, devastated that Izuku had gotten away. This tells us 2 things, though. First one is that he desperately doesn't want to get caught and brought to the police. I'm not sure why he won't make a statement about the neglect you 2 have put him through, though. Probably thinking that no one would believe him, Naomasa said. Does my baby have a place to stay? Don't tell me he is out on the streets, Inko said exasperatedly. Naomasa shook his head. Looking at the condition that every call had said, unlikely. He has cut his hair apparently, but not well, Naomasa said. Inko then started to cry. He'd rather stay on the streets than come home. Oh ho ho, she sobbed. Tashinori moved over and squeezed her into a hug. Naomasa shook his head at her words. Of course Izuku would stay out on the streets than come home. He was abused by his sister, and his parents never cared. He might just have one person out there with him, but that can't be guaranteed yet. Other heroes were there to try and look for him, but he was gone without a trace, meaning Izuku knows what he is doing. So we are going to need someone more qualified to find him before All for One's successor does, Izuku says. Does that mean they'll have to know what we did to him? Tashinori asked with a face of concern. Naomasa looked at him unimpressed and gave him a glare. What is more important to you? A single person knowing of the neglect or Izuku? Naomasa said with a rising anger. Tashinori gulped and lowered his head, not making eye contact. Naomasa silently scoffed and stood up and walked to the door. Don't worry, I've known this man for years. He is a fantastic underground hero and perhaps the best, Naomasa said as he left the room. Tashinori and Inko looked at each other with a face of worry and concern. They'd have to tell another pro-hero of their misdeeds to their quirkless child. They desperately wanted to avoid that, but if they are what it takes to bring Izuku back, then they'll deal with it. Izuku deserves love and attention, and when he comes back home, they'll give it to him. Tashinori will give him one for all so he can be a hero like he has always wanted and be friends Bakugo and Todoroki twins. The door to the office opened again, with two men walking in. Naomasa was one of them, but the other doesn't really fit the description of a hero. He has long black hair that looks like he just woke up. A simple black shirt and pants with a gray scarf twirled around his shoulders. He had massive eye bags and tired red eyes. This was the person that was going to find Izuku? Yagi's this is Eraserhead, Naomasa said. Izuku was terrified. He had just gotten away from the pro-hero amplifier by using his new bolt quirk. But because of his state of delirium and panic, he slammed head first into a brick wall. Izuku's head was bleeding, and even with his new iron bones, Izuku is pretty confident that his nose is broken. But that wasn't Izuku's problem right now. Right now, Izuku was currently being held by someone who seemed quite happy with his arrival. They were a man, pure white hair and deep crimson eyes. They had picked up Izuku, one arm around his neck and the other covering his mouth. For a pipsqueak your size, you are surprisingly heavy, the man said as he picked Izuku up. Izuku was in full panic mode. This guy most certainly wasn't friendly. He's probably like Katsumi, who's smugly happy all of the time except when someone doesn't do what they want. Think Izuku, think. You have to get out of this. Something is telling him that this man will hurt him more than what his tormentors did to him daily. His quirks. Izuku technically has two quirks. One that can turn himself into an electric bolt, but he can't do that if he is covered by something. In this case, that man so he can only emit weak electricity. Izuku also has metal bones which has made him heavier, but the man was strong enough to carry him anyway. His punches are harder except Izuku doesn't exactly know how to throw a punch. He's never had to fight back before, as doing it previously would probably have gotten him killed. But his nails and teeth are sharp though, they can do some serious damage. Izuku then started to electrocute the man. Instead of maybe annoying the man and making him let go or loosen his grip, they started to laugh. Ha ha ha, what? Is that all you have, a light tickle? The man laughed. Izuku paled at that. Was his electricity really that weak? It had hurt him a lot when that thug used it on him. Well, he did have the quirk a lot longer than Izuku did. Izuku did also have iron bones at the time, which probably made it feel a lot stronger than what it was. But Izuku still has more up his sleeve. He reaches his hands up and start clawing at the man's arms. The man yelled in shock at the sudden pain. Izuku felt something cold and wet start to drip down his hands. Looking down, Izuku could see he was right. However, something else started to happen. Something started to grow out of the man's arms. They were white, but looked dirty. Izuku was still scratching them, but it wasn't doing much. He was only carving small lines in them, like carving your name into a tree. Izuku tried to process what his quirk was. It was obviously a transformation quirk, and it didn't seem like it had hurt the man despite it piercing his skin. So it's something already inside his body. The man's quirk was bones. Ah, you little twerp, cut your nails one in a while. The man cursed, but he didn't let Izuku go. If anything, his grip tightened as bones now covered his hands and gripped Izuku tightly. Izuku desperately struggled. He was struggling to breathe. He started wailing on the man's arms, but it wasn't doing much. "Hey guys, look what I found," the man suddenly said, his voice only slightly strained from pain, but otherwise amused. Izuku opened his eyes and tried to see who the man was talking to, despite the fact he was starting to get black spots in his vision. Izuku's eyes widened at what he saw. Izuku saw 4 more people. One of them was a girl on the ground and bleeding, but despite that, she didn't seem to be in any distress. There was a second man there as well, and he had his foot on that woman's back. The man also has the weird attribute of having purple skin in some areas. There were 2 more women in this spot. One had pure white hair that hung to her waist and crimson red eyes like the man that was currently holding him, making Izuku think that those 2 are related. The second woman, however, didn't have any discernible features because her hair covered her entire face. The only thing that Izuku could really focus on was that she was incredibly skinny. "How you found a pipsqueak? He'll be fun to mess around with," the woman laughed. Izuku was losing his consciousness. Izuku couldn't breathe, and every time he tried to loosen the man's grip, it only tightened. Izuku had to do something too, anything to try and prevent incredibly pain and potential death. They're quirks. It hit Izuku like a freight train. He can take the man's quirk. It was the reason the man had yet to let go. But how did he do it again? He grabbed them, but Izuku was doing that now, and he had yet to steal the man's quirk. He could try somewhere else, not like he has an option. Izuku pulled himself up as much as he could and used his other hand to try and reach up. He put his hand on his attacker's face and gripped it tight. He felt a rush of adrenaline fill him as something entered him. It was something natural but different, flexible yet stiff at the same time as that feeling dropped into Izuku. Izuku gasped for breath as the man who was holding him slumped to the ground. Izuku held his neck and felt a few more cuts than there were before. Izuku was coughing and wheezing as he desperately tried to bring the air back into his lungs that was deprived from him for too long. Izuku shakily pushed himself up. He was low on energy but still able to move. Out of curiosity, Izuku tried activating his new quirk. But immediately upon doing so, he felt an immense amount of pain. His iron bones didn't want to comply with what Izuku wanted to do with them. The quirks must be clashing together, making Izuku unable to activate the bone manipulation quirk. Izuku looked up, and all 4 others were staring at him. The girl who was probably his sister looked furiously. She grabbed something out of her pocket, and Izuku's eyes widened when he realized it was a knife. "What the hell did you do to him, brat?" the woman yelled. Izuku wondered if being stabbed in the arm would hurt him with his iron bones, but he wasn't exactly keen on testing the idea. But instead of the woman charging, she cut her own hand. This confused Izuku until fire appeared in her hand. The woman threw the fire at Izuku. Izuku's eyes widened, but he reacted fast enough. Izuku turned into a lightning bolt and zoomed backwards. Izuku hit the wall and reverted back. Izuku stared at the girl who looked even angrier that he had avoided the attack. The woman raised her hand that was covered in vital fluid. Izuku watched as her blood quickly formed into a gun. She must have a creation-type quirk where she can make multiple things from her vital fluid, including that gun. She pointed it at Izuku. Izuku should really run away, turn into a lightning bolt, and escape from this whole situation. But the girl on the ground Izuku couldn't ignore. Despite the fact she didn't have any emotion, she was obviously being attacked until Izuku got there. So Izuku stared down the barrel of the gun and turned into electricity again. She shot the bullet, but it obviously missed Izuku. Izuku then appeared again, but this time, he was in the air. Izuku kneed the girl directly in the face. She gasped in shock before quickly falling to the floor unconscious. Izuku quickly went up to her and grabbed her face. He felt a weird goop-type feeling go into his body. But there was an exact feeling, like it was constantly changing. Izuku stood up and looked at the 2 thugs. The man with purple patches of skin then came up to Izuku. His hands that had purple skin turned into purple tentacles and stretched out to attack Izuku. The tentacles grabbed Izuku's hands and grabbed his neck. Izuku started to choke again, except this time was a lot stronger. Izuku felt like his head was about to pop off. Izuku couldn't try and loosen it as the tentacles also held his hands. Izuku tried to think of more ways to save himself, as his weak, shocking power wasn't doing anything. He had just received a new quirk, one that has the ability to change what their vital fluid is. Izuku knows he has a lot of vital fluid all over him. He has some on his hands and face. The woman had turned her vital fluid into fire. Izuku believes that would be a good idea in this situation. Without wasting any more time, Izuku lit his hands ablaze. The tentacles immediately recoiled and Izuku grabbed the one around his neck. That tentacle let go as well, giving Izuku air once more. Izuku ducked down and jumped back. The man didn't look fazed despite his tentacles being badly burned. Izuku quickly turned into electricity and rushed at the man. The man's eyes widened and he turned his tentacles back into his hands. He brought them up and in front of his face to protect himself. Izuku slammed into him with full force, making the guy stumble back. Thanks to Izuku's electricity, the shock made the guy pull his arms away. Izuku saw his opening and reached forward. He grabbed the man's face and activated his quirk. Izuku watched as the purple skin of the man slowly disappeared and watched as his hand turned from a pale peach to a deep purple. The feeling Izuku had gotten from taking the quirk was slimy and wet, but also brought a numb sensation along with it. Izuku then faced the last thug. Izuku immediately jumped back from fright. He could finally see the girl's face. Her eyes were purple, but that was the least interesting part about her. Piercings and tattoos covered her face. She was currently gnawing her teeth and sprinting at Izuku. Her hair was flying everywhere and it was moving unnaturally, telling Izuku that she was manipulating it. Izuku rubbed 2 fingers on his face, wiping the stain that was on it to his fingers before flinging it at the girl. The vital fluid then flared into fire and the girl screamed. Parts of her hair caught on fire and she quickly tried to put it out. Izuku rushed towards her and put his hand on her face. The girl screamed before passing out from the pain. The feeling Izuku got from the quirk was tangled and brittle, making Izuku believe the girl did have a hair manipulation quirk. Izuku then heard someone getting up from the ground. Izuku turned around and watched the last girl backing away. She wasn't shaking or looking at Izuku scared, but her actions reflect that she was scared. Izuku was confused but decided to try and talk to her. "Hey, are you okay?" Izuku asks her. The girl stops and tilts her head. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asks with a monotone voice. Izuku quickly realizes why she was uncomfortable. Izuku had just beaten up 4 thugs that did have strong quirks. They were all just attacking her before he showed up and did incapacitate them all by just touching their head. Izuku quickly shook his head and straightened himself up. No. I was just attacked and then I saw you getting attacked, so I thought I'd help." Izuku stuttered slightly as he shook his hands in front of his face, trying to show the girl that he wasn't a threat. The girl nodded. She then started to look around. She was looking at all of the people Izuku had just knocked unconscious. Izuku started to shift to side uncomfortable. The fact that she had 0 emotion on her face concerned and frightened Izuku a bit. She then pointed at the second man, the one that had purple skin, but now Izuku has it, and looked back up at Izuku. "How do you have his quirk now?" she asks. Izuku freezes slightly and looks away. Is he going to admit he stole someone's quirk to a stranger? She wasn't giving any signs of emotions at all. Izuku wasn't really comfortable with sharing the fact that he can steal quirks. People didn't exactly react nicely when he didn't have a quirk. They definitely wouldn't react better if he had the ability to take quirks from others. So he shouldn't be taking quirks from others? Izuku knows the hardships of being quirkless in this day and age. But these people would do the exact thing to others. They use their quirks to cause others pain simply because they are stronger. People like that don't deserve quirks. Izuku will be a better hero than his parents and give people like him a safe place to grow up in. "I stole it," Izuku answered in a small voice. He wasn't looking at the girl, too afraid of her reaction. "For how long?" the girl asked. Izuku chuckled softly and kicked the ground. "Until I decide to give it back," Izuku answered. "So it's permanent?" the girl asked. Izuku nodded his head. "Yeah, I guess. My quirk allows me to steal and gift quirks how I please, although I'm still new to the process. I have only recently found out I have this quirk," Izuku stated, rubbing the back of his head. "Wait, you could give me a quirk?" the girl asked. Izuku stopped and blinked. "Wait, are you quirkless?" Izuku asked, now facing her. Izuku has never met a quirkless person near his age before. The only other quirkless people he's met are people who are in their 50s. Maybe this person knows what it's like. Unfortunately, the girl shook her head. "No, I mean kinda. My quirk is emotive deprived. which means I can't feel anything. It's such an awful quirk, and the only good it does is make me immune to pain, the girl said. Izuku's eyes widened. That does sound like an awful quirk. One that Izuku probably would have preferred to be quirkless for instead of possessing it. This girl lost likely has the same. Perhaps he could gift her a quirk? I could give you one of their quirks. Do you want to pick? Izuku asks. The girl nods and points to the girl who had a hair manipulation quirk. I've always wanted a quirk like that. It seems so nice, she said. Izuku nodded his head and walked over to her before stopping. I've actually never given a quirk to anyone before, but I do know taking a quirk hurts. I'm also not sure how quirks work if someone has multiple. I know I'm okay because of my quirk's natural buffer. The girl shook her head. Take your time. If it takes me passing out to get a quirk that doesn't make me emotionless, I'll take it, the girl said. She then sat down on the ground and crossed her legs. Izuku nodded and then tried to focus. His quirk allows him to figure out the abilities of other quirks he's taken. So can he figure out his quirk? Izuku paused and opened out his palm. The girl eyes widened as lights appeared in Izuku's hand. A dark gray light with swirls of black going around it. 6 lights appeared in the dark light Izuku was forming in his hand. Izuku could feel all of the quirks. Metal bones, bolt, bone mutate, hemomorphy, tentacles, hair grow. Izuku can feel the connections between 2 of his quirks, but he'll get back to that later. Izuku dives into his quirk. Izuku sees code, unwritten code. A lot of it. But Izuku has a limit, and it looks like he is already at it. But Izuku looks deeper into it. Deeper into his quirk. Izuku then finds something. Consent. If the other person consents, they can take and give a quirk with no pain, and Izuku doesn't need to grab their face. No harm will be done. Actually, Izuku could take the girl's quirk with no consequences. Currently, his bone mutate quirk is out as he has hit his limit with how many quirks he can have at once. So if he took the girl's quirk, it wouldn't have any effect on Izuku. With that question sorted, Izuku then goes to the hair grow quirk and takes a look. It's a simple hair manipulation quirk that doesn't do much more than other hair manipulation quirks. But then Izuku notices a quick detail. Izuku can rapidly increase the change of his hair color, making it turn gray faster than it normally would. Well, these guys will probably go to the police, so Izuku will need to alter his hair. The girl on the ground becomes shocked when Izuku's hair turns white and becomes slightly longer. The light in Izuku's hands then disappears, and he opens his eyes again. You can change your hair color? The girl asks. Izuku shrugs. Kind of. Only white as I made it essentially older faster, Izuku answered. The girl nodded. Izuku took a step towards her and held out his hand. Give me your hand. I can give you a new quirk and take your old one away, Izuku said. Wait, you want me quirk? The girl asked, seemingly confused. Izuku shook his head and smiled. I've hit my limit on my quirk, so it won't be activated for a while, Izuku said. The girl nodded and raised her hand. Izuku grabbed her hand and shot out the hair grow quirk into her body. Before Izuku let go, however, he felt her quirks start to attack each other, not liking the idea of having 2 completely different quirks in her system. Izuku quickly took her emotive-deprived quirk and immediately felt it lock. Izuku let go of her hand and looked at her. She had her eyes wide open. She had a bit of her hair in her hand and made it grow. Izuku watched for the first time her face showing emotion. Her eyes had widened in excitement, and tears were bringing on her eyes. She looked up to Izuku and quickly stood up. Thank you, thank you, thank you, the girl said and squeezed Izuku in a hug. The girl was a lot taller than Izuku, and his head went immediately into her melons. Not that the girl noticed Izuku's embarrassment. After that, Izuku and the girl talked. He found the girl's name was Himaki Gatsu, and she was 18 and had suffered bullying her entire life because of her quirk. These were the main bullies, with the 2 boys being the older brother of both the other girls. Himaki worked at a cafe nearby, and since Izuku didn't have a phone to contact her, he could go there whenever he wanted to talk. After they tied the 4 up, Himaki called the police, and Izuku quickly left, as you know. Izuku Yagi wanted. Izuku was making his way home with a new jacket he scabbed from the girl who had hair grow. She was the same height as Izuku, so her jacket fit. While Izuku was walking, he started looking deeper into his quirks, trying to learn more about his new quirks. Like tentacles. The purple patches on his skin can make Izuku create tentacles. He can only make 2 tentacles at a time without causing strain on his body. Izuku can also make tentacles form on flat surfaces, except Izuku will only be able to keep them active for a very short period of time. Hemomorphy grants Izuku to change their vital fluid to whatever he wants. Fire, metal, acid, light, and plenty more. However, Izuku needs to be injured to utilize their quirk, so it won't be something Izuku will use too often with a support item to help. Lastly was bone mutate. Very simple. Izuku can manipulate their bone. Drinking milk keeps them healthy and strong. However, the quirk seems to have problems with his already established Metal Bones quirk. The two different quirks clash, making Izuku unable to use that quirk. However, Izuku had felt a connection to those two quirks. The reason why is Izuku found out he can fuse his quirks. Izuku had opened his palms and two lights glowed in his palm. Izuku pushed them together and a new quirk was formed. Heavy Skeleton. Izuku can manipulate his bones however he wants, and they are still metal. Izuku makes it home with a bright smile on his face. Although he did have a concussion and he'll have to fix that, but right now, Izuku is going to test out his new quirks. Aizawa and Naomasa sat in Naomasa's office. The Yagis had both recently left, and Aizawa had left to get a coffee. Naomasa can tell that the man is furious, and if it wasn't for Izuku being an innocent child, he would have ignored the case. So just because those two are top 10 heroes, they get off with no prison sentence? Aizawa asks with seething anger. Naomasa asked and nods his head. It will cause a lot of uproar and chaos if All Might was arrested. Naomasa said, making Aizawa scoffed. So we have no clue on how to find this kid because his parents have forgotten him for 9 years, Aizawa said angrily. Naomasa shakes his head. Not quite. Izuku has future hero analyses booklets, so we can look at those to look at the boy's thought process. And this, Naomasa said. Aizawa raised an eyebrow as Naomasa bends down underneath his desk. He then comes back and puts something on the table. These are painkillers. Powerful ones. You can only be administered these at hospitals. So perhaps we can find out who gave him these, Naomasa said. Aizawa didn't say anything. He leaned forward and grabbed the painkillers. He read over the label before pocketing it. I know someone who can give these out. I suggest we pay them a visit, Aizawa answered. Naomasa nods and writes that down. As he was doing that, however, he receives a phone call. Naomasa raises an eyebrow and picks the phone up and puts it to his ear. Hello, Tsukauchi speaking, Naomasa says. Hello Tsukauchi, it's Tsurigami. For more people have been found without quirks, he answers. Naomasa groans and bangs his head on the table. Izuku's quirks. Metal bones, bolt, heavy skeleton, hemomorphy, tentacles. Not active. Emotive deprive. Izumi, Shoto, Katsumi and Zayato had all decided to a cafe to hang out. They had also asked Katsuki to come, but he declined. None of them had really been the same after Izuku ran away and their parents figuring out what they had done. Their punishments from Nizu was that all of their recommendations were removed. Not that Katsuki and Katsumi had won in the first place. But they had to attend villain rehabilitation program as a volunteer. They each had to go to a different one or one at a different time, so they weren't in the same area while helping others. Despite them thinking it would suck, they quickly found out that almost all of the villains there suffered quirk discrimination. Not only that, but despite their records of crime, they seemed to be genuinely nice people who had nowhere to go but with the wrong crowd. They were a lot worse than these villains, and they had been told that they were destined to be heroes all of their life. It made them feel even worse. The group also had to attend therapy, which was weird and difficult. They know what they did was wrong, but that doesn't change the fact that they have seriously inflated egos. Katsumi especially. The group of 4 all sat down. Hey guys, how are you all going? Izumi asks with a smile. Katsumi gives her a dead look. Alright, I guess despite our circumstances, Shoto answers. Zayato nods her head. Katsumi groans and shoves herself back on the chair, causing it to scrape across the ground. This caused the others' heads all to turn towards her. How do you think it's been? You can live a normal life at home as your parents also acted horribly towards Izuku. You two still have your siblings that don't have a bad bone in their body. Do you know what I have? A pushover father. My mother loved Izuku more than she'll ever love either me or Katsuki, and learning what we did to him to try and keep him safe made her furious. She refuses to even be in the same room as us. Our father doesn't help as he's too scared with disagreeing with Mom. We have to cook dinner ourselves now, and if we try to talk to her, she just doesn't respond. Katsumi says, slamming her hands down on the table for emphasis. Izumi sighs at her friend's reactions. She guessed it would be like this. Both her and Katsuki have always acted like king and queen, even having loyal followers at school. She's always cocky and on top. Only her mother and Auntie Inko does she respect. So when Izuku ran away, she lost it. However, Katsuki wasn't acting the way Izumi had thought he would. He had become oddly silent and avoids his group. Izumi finds this strange as Katsuki had always liked to be in the spotlight, which was why he was Izuku's main tormentor. He had to be the best. But now he's faded into the background, refusing hangouts and no longer responding to text messages. Yeah, I do understand. My mother has become a lot more stricter with us. However, Dad is a different story. He seems distressed and upset with himself. I think it might be with the whole Toya thing, Shoto says, lowering his head near the end. Izumi and Katsumi notice Ayato cover her mouth and look further down. Toya is obviously a touchy subject. They don't remember much about him as he committed suicide when they were still young. But the main memories they have of him is Toya protecting Izuku from being beaten by them. They don't know the full story, and they probably won't ask. Did you ask why Kachin didn't come Kachin? Ayato asks. Katsumi scoffs and leans back in her chair. Hell if I know. The butthole is being silent. I don't know what is wrong with him. He always enjoyed hurting Izuku the most, and has never liked the old hag yelling at him, so I'm not sure what the hell has gotten into him. Katsumi said, shaking her head. Izumi sighed and lowered her head. Things have become a lot more complicated since Izuku disappeared. I wish they find Izuku. Even though he probably won't forgive us as he got to the point of running away, but at least it'll solve some of the problems, Izumi said with a forced smile. Ayato doesn't seem to be fond of the idea of not being forgiven, while Shoto nodded with his usual stoic expression. Katsumi, however, looked indifferent. What is it, Kachin? Izumi asks. Katsumi huffs and shakes her head. It's stupid, but Katsuki thinks that Izuku is too smart to be found, Katsumi says. This does intrigue the other three. Really? I know Izuku was a lot more intelligent than I gave him credit for, but I don't believe he would be smart enough to live off of the street for too long, Shoto said. Katsumi snorts and shakes his head. Yeah, but that's more. A bit more of what the moron said was that Izuku had either planned to run away, so he knew what to do, or if he didn't, he'd find a way to get out of almost all situations. I'm not sure where he got that idea, but it's stupid, Katsumi said. Then she stood up. I'll buy us drinks and food. I'm starving. She groans as she walks to the counter. Katsuki was in his room. For the past couple of days, he had barely left his room. He had spent it thinking. He had always been king, told by everyone he'd be the number hero no matter what. But after taking the time to think, he's no hero, even close. In his head, it was a good idea teaching the nerd a lesson. His dream was unobtainable, and he was too nice for his good. So getting all in his face and tell him that he's a worthless nobody sounded like a good idea at the time. Katsuki had always been the top, so he'd be Izuku's top bully. However, that wasn't his reason for doing that to Izuku. He did care for the nerd despite his villainous actions. If he hurt Izuku the most, the others would lay off of him. It was what he did while they were still young, and kind of kept that habit up all the way now. No one had ever stopped him. In fact, he was encouraged. So naturally, he thought it was a good idea. Oh, how he couldn't be more wrong. His other idiot friends think that him coming home will be the best for both them and Izuku. But Katsuki knows the truth. He knows Izuku will do everything in his power to get away, or lock himself in his room and refuse to come out. Izuku may not realize this himself, but he is quite good at planning and thinking under pressure. Good at both talking to people or getting away. It just didn't work on Katsuki. Out of all of his friends, he knew Izuku the best. Not well by any means, but the best. He knew Izuku was intelligent and could think of complicated solutions off of anything in seconds and pick up small details like it was vital fluid covering a room. Katsuki had read a few of Izuku's books out of curiosity, and he knew he was a genius. Katsuki was just too proud to admit it. He'd also hung out with Izuku the most out of any of his friends. His mother loved him and have him come over a lot despite the fact he refused on several occasions for being a burden. During this time, Katsuki had never yelled or hit him once. It was a safe place that Katsuki didn't think that hurting him here would do any good, not including his mother in the equation. Katsuki knew the police or heroes wouldn't find Izuku. Especially if they found out he was quirkless, they'd give up the search immediately. Katsuki had the best bet of finding the nerd out of anyone, and he knew it, which is why he had several images over a board. Izuku had been found in a certain area, but managed to escape. He had cut his hair that obviously hadn't been from a barber, which means he had access to supplies. And he knows the damn nerd wouldn't steal a damn penny. So he was probably near a dump or had found someone willing to give him some stuff. Katsuki doesn't know which one, but he swears he'll find Izuku. Not to bring the damn nerd home, but to apologize. He's already hurt Izuku enough. He doesn't need to do any more damage. Izuku walked through the street with his new jacket that he may or may not have stolen. But in his defense, he had no choice. He doesn't have much clothes, and he was just recently discovered by the heroes, and he can't let them take him home. They'll find out his quirk is all for one, and he has been taking the quirks of thugs, which is why he is also thankful he had that hair grow quirk to alter his hair. He likes it white instead of green. As to why he was walking through the street. Well, he was going to Himaki's cafe, the girl he had helped yesterday. Maybe they could be friends? Izuku isn't really good in social situations, only knowing how to persuade others to leave him alone or that he is fine. He doesn't even know if him and that girl even have a friendship. But Izuku hopes that they do and that she is currently on shift, so he doesn't look like an idiot. Perhaps he could also be given free food by her, as he doesn't exactly have much money to use. Izuku does also feel bad that his main reason to go here was in hopes of getting free food, but sue him for being a little bit selfish once in a while. Izuku walks into the cafe he was told that she works at and entered. Izuku looked around, trying to not make himself noticeable and actually paying attention to others this time. Because last time he didn't got him nabbed by a hero. Izuku won't let that happen again. He walked into the cafe and immediately spotted Himaki working. She had a smile on her face that made Izuku happy, knowing that this was probably her first time smiling because of her dumb quirk. Izuku also was thankful that he had hit his limit with his quirk for the time being, so he didn't have to give this wretched quirk to anyone else, and he wasn't affected by it. Izuku walked over to her, and Himaki noticed. "Hey Izuku, glad to see that you came." Himaki smiled brightly. Izuku returned her smile. "Hey Himaki, it's good to see you smile. How have you been?" Izuku asks. Himaki's smile dwindled slightly, but it didn't disappear. "Well, I'll have to be called to the police because of my whole quirk switch thing. But there isn't much they'll get out of me. Don't worry, I won't reveal your little secret, Izuku," Himaki said, coming closer to Izuku and whispering the last part. Izuku couldn't help but be thankful for that. The two continued to talk, Himaki gifting Izuku a free cookie. It wasn't much, but Izuku wasn't going to complain. He found out that they were looking for a singer to entertain the crowd at night. Izuku was offered, but he has no singing ability, so he just left the offer floating. The two were having a nice time until a scream caught the two's attention. "What was that?" Izuku asked. "I'm not sure. Can you go check that out?" Himaki asked. Izuku nodded his head and left the cafe. The cry sounded like it was on the other side of the cafe, so Izuku walked into the alleyway that led to the back. Cautiously, Izuku peeked around the corner. There was 4 people in the alleyway. 3 of them were girls. One had a beautiful white dress and golden blonde hair. The second was a girl with jet black hair and a red skirt, and the last one had blue hair and blue shirt and skirt. They were standing in front of a boy who was trapped in a box of light. His skin was jet black, and he had dyed green hair. Izuku watched as the girl with golden hair crouched down and start tapping on the box of light. "Hey there, freak. How does it feel to be caged? You better get used to it. Things like you should have never crawled out of that hole," the girl said. The boy curled further into himself and pushed himself up against the wall. The girl with black hair started to laugh. Izuku felt incredibly angered, but he couldn't just charge in. Unless Izuku was going to kill them, they were going to know what he looks like. The only reason Izuku wasn't worried about that before, because when the guy had grabbed him, he already knew what he looked like. In this situation, Izuku would attack them, and they'd have full view of him. It's not like he can add articles of clothing to himself whenever he wants. But what if it wasn't clothes? Izuku hasn't really tested his new heavy skeleton quirk, but the idea should definitely allow him to make a makeshift mask. Izuku stepped back and focused on that quirk. He can feel his bones shifting uncomfortable underneath his skin before slowly. Something cold is touching his skin. When Izuku stopped, he reached up and touched his face. It was hard and metallic. It had worked. Izuku then put his hood up over his head before he walked into the alleyway. "What's going on here?" Izuku asked, making his voice as deep as possible. All three girls turned around. The girl with golden blonde hair looked at Izuku annoyed with her bright blue eyes. But Izuku also notices another detail. Her freckles were glowing. Izuku looked at the box again and saw that the corners had a small orb of light. She was probably the one who probably works similarly to constellations. The girl with black hair looked confused and upset as she narrowed her eyes at Izuku. Izuku then looked over to the last girl with blue hair. She looked scared. She looked around at her friends before working backwards. Odd. She doesn't seem the same compared to the other two. None of your business, pal. Unless you want to be stuck like the freak over there, the girl with golden hair said. Izuku frowned, but got an idea. She seems to be quirk bias, and her quirk is probably flashy and effective for hero work. So she'd obviously be a prick about it because no one is going to stop her. So Izuku is willing to try something. You think you're stronger than me? Let's compare and see if you're as good as you seem to think, Izuku said. The girl smiled smugly and walked over to Izuku. The girl with the blue hair, however, put her arm cautiously on the obvious leader's shoulder. Wait, I don't think it's a good idea, she said quietly. The girl frowned before elbowing the girl in the face. She yelped and clutched her nose before falling to the ground. Izuku widened his eyes in shock. That girl was only trying to warn her, but ended up getting hit. Shut up, I'm the best and you know it. Don't try and act like you're better than me, she said angrily before turning back to Izuku with a smug smile. She walked up to him with her hands on her hips. So you think you're hot shot, big boy? What's your quirk? She asks. Based all around her quirks, Izuku wasn't surprised. He can tell who those types of people are by just being around them. It isn't entirely their fault, as everyone, including teachers, encourage their actions their entire life. But she acts differently. Izuku isn't exactly sure why or how he can tell, but it's just a sense that he is getting from her. He doesn't understand, but he isn't going to ignore his gut instinct. Izuku raises his hand and points his palm upwards. Are you sure you want to test what I can do? Izuku asks. Tora, please don't. The girl with blue hair pleads from the ground. Tora ignores her and smirks at Izuku. She raises her hand and places it on top of Izuku's. Go ahead, you get one shot before I kick your butt, she said. Izuku smirks as he feels her quirk loose from the consent she has given him. Without any hesitation, Izuku takes the girl's quirk. Izuku watches as the freckles on the girl's face stop glowing and her box disappear instantly, freeing the boy with black skin. Izuku smirks, raises his hand, showing her a glowing light. It was white with golden swirls covering it like an atom. Thanks for your quirk, Izuku said. The girl's eyes widen. Fear flashes across her face. She reaches up to her face and starts picking at her freckles. Izuku presumes something is supposed to happen. When nothing does, she looks at Izuku with unimaginable fury. What did you do to me? Give it back, she yelled. Izuku shook his head and brought his hand up to his chest, closing his hand. Don't think so, Izuku said, feeling a sense of pride at the look of horror on the girl's face. Izuku knows it was wrong, but people like this, people who believe they are heroes, yet abuse others finally getting served justice, is pure pleasure for Izuku. It's justice. The second girl then looked furious. She raised her hand and a spear that seemed to be formed of pure energy appeared in her hand. Give her back her quirk, you villain, she yelled and threw the spear. The spear crashed Izuku in the face, making him stumble back a step, but thanks to his metal mask Izuku was fine. Izuku then grew more metal on his body. He made claws and gave himself iron boots. Izuku crashed down before charging at the girl. Izuku moved incredibly fast, faster than what the girl could do to react. Izuku extended his hand and grabbed her face. The girl then screamed before dropping to the floor. He had taken her quirk. I'm calling the police, the blonde girl announced with a shaky voice. Izuku turned around and looked at her. The girl yelped before turning around and sprinting away. Izuku sighed and looked down to the ground where the unconscious girls lay. Izuku withdrew parts of his quirk but kept his mask on. He then looked up to the other two, who both looked terrified. Hey, can you get your friend somewhere? She'll wake up in about an hour, Izuku asked. The blue-haired girl flinched and looked down at her friend. She looked back up to Izuku. You're not going to attack me? The girl asked. Izuku shook his head. No, I have deemed these two unworthy of their quirks. You're different, so you can keep yours. Now go. I don't have all day, Izuku said. The girl nodded frantically. She scrambled over to her friend and picked her up. She then quickly left the alley without looking back. Izuku then turned to the boy with black skin who was now not looking so scared and was staring at Izuku with wonder. "Why did you help me?" the boy asked. "Why wouldn't I help you? You're human like everyone else. You don't deserve to be ostracized for being born," Izuku answered sympathetically. The boy looked up at him with pure shock and amazement. "Thank you?" the boy said, not sure on what to say. Izuku chuckled and sat down. He's probably not good with talking to people. Exactly like him. "Hey, what's your name?" Izuku asked. The boy flinched before smiling sheepishly. "Akito Mabinori," the boy answered. Izuku decided to take a risk. He seems like a good guy and Izuku kind of needs friends. Despite having all for one, he does need other people to survive, no matter how much planning he has. "Do you have any friends?" Izuku asked. Akito looked down and shook his head. "Do you want to be mine?" Izuku asked. Akito looked up, shocked at what Izuku had just said. "Wait, really?" the boy asked, not believing it. Izuku nodded. He took his hoodie off, revealing his white hair. He then started removing his metal mask, revealing what he actually looks like. His skin was a light gray and his eyes were an emerald green. He had small purple areas on his chin and triangles on his cheek. Izuku then outstretched his hand. "Izuku, let's be friends," Izuku says with a wide smile. The two had then started to hang out. After Akito teleported them away to avoid the police that was coming to the scene, Izuku had found out what his quirk was. It was called Shadow Port, which allows him to teleport to dark areas. A side effect from his quirk is that his skin is permanently black, and because of that and his somewhat villainous quirk, he has been bullied his entire life. Well, not anymore. They had hung out the next day as well. They had gone around the park with Akito buying fish and chips. Izuku was incredibly thankful. They had a good time, and Izuku was happy. He just needed to find a job and a way to change his identity. He'll need help with that, but he's got time. With his change of looks, he'll last for a while before they catch on. Izuku and Akito had said goodbye before going their separate ways. Izuku had considered taking Akito back to his house, but Izuku didn't want him to know that he lives in a dumpster. Also, the fact that Akito doesn't know he is Izuku Yagi, the very one who is missing, doesn't help either. If he ever finds out, however, he can always just bluff and say that kid was quirkless while he wasn't. Some people at Aldera had said that he was quirkless, and the case lost a lot of traction, which Izuku was thankful for. They don't know he has all for one, but that doesn't change the fact that his family knows. He can't go home, he can't. As Izuku was walking, his thoughts were distracted by a scream. Izuku, being the hero.